Welcome to another edition of Research Fantasy presents our NBA DFS plays for Friday, April 21st, 2017. I'm your host. If you don't know me by now, my name is Nick Valinchak. I play as Nick from CWE on all of your favorite daily fantasy sites, and I'm here to break down the slate. The idea of doing picks at this point, if you haven't watched the last few videos, to me is just a little bit done away with. You're not, we're just going to say the same thing in a sense every time. It's really hard to kind of differentiate one day from another, except for the fact that the league is managing to put kind of different games on different days, which is good so that you don't just regurgitate the same basic lineups. Also, since we're using FanDuel as our basis for pricing during the playoffs, one thing that I noticed when I logged on last night to kind of write the article that I do is that all of the prices have been put like really pretty ridiculously high. That is not to say that we can't still find the ability to build a good lineup around what we've been given. It just makes it a little more complicated to put a bunch of, quote-unquote star players. The first thing from basically what I've seen in all the games, anyone below 2K you could pretty much avoid. I know that we're going to try to think to be cute, to try to stuff some of these guys into our lineups because we want to get another stud in there. There are a few guys that are underpriced to the point, I think, where we could still use them and end up with a good lineup. I'd rather go that route than to try to essentially give up one spot for someone who's probably going to give us, a dud. Nothing. So let's start Boston and Chicago. Kind of surprised at this point that we see Boston trailing Chicago 2-0. Not a good sign for things that the game is headed to Chicago. On top of that, Isaiah Thomas has been away from the team for a couple of days to tend to his family issues with his sister getting in the accident and dying. So haven't really had a great opportunity to get together, try to get on the same page. It's going to be tough for them to go into Chicago with a team that's rolling right now and end up okay. Isaiah's price has come up. He's still going to be the lead guy on this team. I know that he didn't come through for the team last time, but he's still going to be the main focus. Behind him, there's Al Horford. And quite frankly and honestly, really the only other players I'm looking at for Boston based on FanDuel pricing on this slate would be Jay Crowder. Just because Crowder has the ability to put together some pretty good stat lines when things are going right. He hasn't been able to do it thus far. His performances have been extremely disappointing. And then I don't mind Kelly Olynyk. I know we see the 5,100 price tag, but like I said, he's one of the guys that he's definitely being used in this playoff situation. Kind of like Jonas Jerebko was used last year, where he's that spark off the bench type situation. Amir Johnson, not a long-term play in the playoffs, I don't think, especially not against this Bulls team that's running either Mirotic or Portis, of which Olynyk just matches up with either of those guys much better. I think that he's a guy who's in a good position to exceed value. Moving on to the Chicago side of things, Jimmy Butler 11-2. At first look, made me a little bit uncomfortable, but if the Celtics come to play, Jimmy Butler is one of the few guys on the slate that can hit, that's priced where he's at, that can hit value. So I really don't mind that. Rondo at 8K at first glance is like, Lord have mercy, I can't believe this is what we have to pay. But again, I've said it multiple times. First of all, national TV Rondo is a special thing. Second of all, he's a triple-double threat every single night. So, if he's putting up 12, 12, and 12, and he has a couple steals or blocks that offset his turnovers, the dude's got 50 points written all over him, and that's exactly what we saw in the last game when he put up 11, 9, 14, 5 steals, 3 turnovers. The steals number is not something that we can expect, but it's not to say that he can't have a couple of extra points, a couple of extra rebounds. Rondo's still a guy I'm looking at. Wade, I think 7,100, a little bit of a tough pill to swallow, but with 30-point outings in both games, 30 fantasy point outings, I think Wade still has enough upside. Robin Lopez, again, he's a he's a guy who might be a little bit underpriced. He's a main factor in this offense. It's really weird to say that. I don't like the price because we've been paying $4,500 for him the vast majority of the year. Now he's up at $6,100. I think he's still a guy I'd look at because he might be the type of guy that somebody else looks at and says, no way am I paying $6,100 for Robin Lopez. Finally, we have Nikola Mirotic at $6,500. Guy can go off at any point in time. Just really don't like him, though, to be completely honest, in this playoff series. Even after a bad game last time out, Bobby Portis at $4,400. Still someone who you have to consider based on the fact that he's already shown what his upside in this series is. I think Boston's going to get back on track, but they've got a tough hill to climb. Moving on to Houston and OKC. Houston played a much tighter game last time. Harden sees the jump up to 13-6. That's a big price. That really is. But he's definitely got that type of upside. And you're not, when you're sitting on the slate and you have probably three guys that can get there, you have to take him into consideration. Outside that on the team, if Ariza could somehow get going, 6K is not the worst price, but he's just been more of a defensive focus. It's playing plus 32 minutes in each game, and he's only come up with 11 and 13 fantasy points. Disappointing, to say the least. Only guys I'm really, really liking. Capella, I think, has some upside at his price. I don't think Nene is going to see enough minutes to hit his target. But three guys in the guard positions. Patrick Beverley at $6,100. Eric Gordon at $53. Lou Williams at $49, especially if this game somehow does turn into a blowout. Those last two are going to see a couple of extra minutes potentially. I think Patrick Beverley's got a good role right now going into this. 6K is not a price I mind for someone who can get 35 to 40 fantasy points. Eric Gordon broke the 30-point plateau last time. Definitely wasn't a good play the time before, but things change game to game. But those would be the guys I would essentially be looking at as far as tournament options go. We're not playing cash games at this point because we're not clinically insane. OKC side of things, well, Russell Westbrook did have his breakout game. That's something that I mentioned after the first game is, like, I don't love the idea because the Rockets are just so good, so much better than OKC. Russ is going to have to score 51 real points pretty much every game to keep this thing close. Whether he can do that or not is a big question mark, but I think because of the fact that he's done it and he's the sole provider of offense on this team, you have to look at least a bit. I don't mind him at all. He's a guy who, even at his absolutely ridiculous price, can crush value. Oladipo priced all right. He did do a little bit better. If he keeps building upward, I think he's going to be a guy that we'll be able to look at. I don't mind him at all tonight. Andre Robertson, I don't know where the hell whatever he's doing is coming from. But he's got back-to-back plus 30-point games, and at his cost, I mean, that's excellent value. He's a guy that's churning out the minutes. Don't mind him. Taj Gibson, I never thought in the playoffs I'd be saying go Taj Gibson over Enes Kanter, and I'm not saying it with, like, the most confidence, believe me. But Kanter is seeing such little time on the court. He's been relatively productive with it, but I think that eventually something's going to give, and one of these bigs is going to have at least a decent game, and they're all priced pretty cheap, so I don't mind rolling out Taj Gibson tonight. Not seeing the most minutes himself, but he's a guy I don't mind. Finally, let's go to LA Clippers and the Utah Jazz. Series is split 1-1, tight as we expected it to be. Quite frankly and honestly, not a lot to love here. Games going to Utah. I think that does take away some of the sizzle from the Clippers. You run into what you've run into all year with Utah. You know, these guys, it's cute to play Blake Griffin when he's 7.6K on DraftKings, you know, but when you're staring 9,200 on FanDuel down against the Utah Jazz at home, I'm sorry. Chris Paul, not a guy I'm looking at tonight. Blake Griffin, not a guy I'm looking at tonight. Only reason I'm looking at DeAndre Jordan at his price is we're still dealing with the fact that Rudy Gobert is out, and if the ball just happens to bounce his way, he can put up a 45-point game. If anybody exceeds value at those lofty prices for the Clippers tonight, I believe it will be Jordan. Only other guy really looking at, and I know I've hyped him in like every video, and eventually it's going to pay off, and I don't just keep mentioning it because I hope it's eventually going to pay off and I look smarter than I actually am. But Luke Ricard-Abba-Mute continues to see minutes. You know, he's on the floor because he has to be a defensive presence, and he's done a really good job shutting Gordon Hayward down thus far. He's going to mess around and just be in the right place in the right time. And at his price, where he's at like 3,900, you know, not a ton of people going to be on that. But if a guy's playing 36 and 38 minutes a game, he's going to break that 20-point mark, and he's going to be in the winning lineup eventually. So that's the last guy I'm looking at the Clippers. Not a lot going on there for me. Moving over to Utah, Gordon Hayward's really, really, really priced out. There's no way I can consider over $8K for him on FanDuel. It's just not happening. Really, my main focus on this one, I have three guys that I kind of like. Derek Favors, I just don't think he's there yet. Maybe he might get there by the end of this series, but I just don't think he's a guy I really like. In descending order or ascending order, I'd go. It's so tough to call, but I'd probably go Rodney Hood. Again, this is a guy who's doing pretty much nothing with the time on the court. He's scoring some points. Surprisingly, he's just not seeing minutes. And I think that's where the biggest problem is coming from right now, is that he's not seeing the time he needs on the court to produce. I would consider him, for lack of other options and a cost-saving measure, Boris Diaw, kind of the same position. I don't love the idea, but he's floating at like that 22 fantasy point mark, and I think he could get there in one of these games, so I have to pay some attention to him. But as far as I'm concerned, the top guy I'm really looking at in this game is going to be George Hill, 5,600. I still feel like with everybody getting priced up, putting him and Patrick Beverley together on FanDuel just gives you the most bang for your buck for guys who are likely to exceed what their cost is. I know it's tough to say that with Hill because he hasn't been there yet, but this is a guy who's routinely put up some pretty strong fantasy performances, and we're now at the point where if he hits 30, 32 fantasy points, we're jumping with joy because he's absolutely exceeded value. So I don't mind that tonight. Really tough set of games. The pricing increase is what I like. It's something that I've kind of been vocal about, and I don't have much of a voice, and I understand that, but FanDuel just plays so soft, and it's a little bit irritating. Not just in baseball, but pretty much, or not just in basketball, but pretty much everything across the board. I don't like when you could just build whatever team you want. Maybe it makes the game more fun for people who like aren't skilled, but it takes so much of the competition out of things, I think, for someone like me who I like the challenge. I like to see if what I think for that night is a step ahead or a step behind of everyone else. And hey, half and half, you know, still make money. Maybe I'm not absolutely killing it. I'm not raking it in and doing it full time. But props to FanDuel for kind of making this a little more challenging as the season winds down. That's it. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again every day for the remainder of the NBA playoffs, as long as there's fantasy games to be played. Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel below. Head over to researchfantasy.com. Sign up for our MLB mailing list. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Research and Win. And join us again tomorrow.